Hello again and welcome back to the Nordic Pavilion here in Glasgow. Today's first event that is active both here in Glasgow and in Helsinki is one that is called Towards a More Livable Planet. And it will be my colleague Jukka Ahonen who will be moderating this from Helsinki. Hello Jukka, can you hear me?
We hear you very well. Really great to see you there.
Nice, and very nice to see you. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. As Mary just mentioned, we will have an event towards a more livable planet. How does Nordic financing contribute to the green transition? So my name is Jukka, and I'm head of communications at the Nordic Investment Bank. I will be moderating this event together with my colleague Josefine Hoviniemi from Nefco. We will be discussing today how the Nordic Baltic region is addressing the climate change with different financing models and tools. We are also going to present some of the Nordic or Nordic Baltic cases, projects that these three financial institutions which are present here have been financing. As Mary said, this is a so-called hybrid event. We are now at the Nordic Hub in Helsinki. And this hub is connected to Glasgow. And of course, this is we don't need to travel to Glasgow, so we will get sort of information directly what's going on there. So we are very lucky with that. The schedule is relatively tight, but we of course would like to get questions from the audience here in Helsinki, as well as from the audience in Glasgow. Our event basically has two parts. We have the link to Glasgow, and we are very lucky that I saw that the Finnish Minister of Environment is already there. So she has actually promised to give us a short briefing about the negotiations. And then we will have a panel discussion here in Helsinki, and we have here three participants who are representing the Nordic and the Nordic Baltic financial institutions, which actually all have their headquarters here under the same roof. So the first one here is Mr. Andre Kysvek. He's the president of the Nordic Investment Bank, managing director Karin Isaksson from NDF, and Trund Mo from Nefco. So this is our lineup today. But now we actually need to go directly to Glasgow, because we know that the minister has a really busy schedule. And read the news. There's lots of information, there's lots of flow, but actually you don't really know what's going on. It's very difficult to know that what's actually happening. There are so many different actors there who actually are not part of the negotiations. But the Minister Mikkonen, Finnish Minister for Environment, is part of the negotiations. So would you please tell us what's going on there?
Well, first of all, many greetings from Glasgow to Helsinki and everywhere else. Well, I must say that, like you said, there's a lot of going on, and in the negotiation itself, but also all the other things around the negotiations and different kind of pledges and declaration outside the negotiation, which are also important. But now, if we think about the negotiations itself, we have two things. We have the rule book to finish, and then we have this kind of cover decision where we want to make sure that we will continue to work together to keep 1.5 alive. So we are sure that everyone is doing their best. So these are now the negotiations at the level that we are about finishing the technical level, and now it's more on political level. And all the hard questions are there on the political level. So there's a question of the finance, for example, question of the Article 6 and other part of the rule books. But then there's this cover decision text, and which is very important, and it's very important that in this cover decision we saw that we are really seriously about to tackle the climate crisis, and there we need to show our encourage, and negotiation about this text is also going on. So I think there's going to be quite long days ahead of us, and hopefully we will finish. Well, the presidency is still hoping that we are finishing on Friday, but let's see, it might be after that.
So basically, at this stage, you really don't know yet what the outcome exactly will be. But so far, the discussions and the negotiations, has it been according to your expectations, or has it been better or worse?
Well, at the moment, those, for example, for this cover decision text, what was on the table by the first text putting on the table by the presidency, it's quite promising, but you never know where it's going. We still think it needs more ambitious, but then there's other parties with things that there is too more ambitious inside it. So there's a lot of discussion going on. But I'm still quite optimistic, and also with the rule book, I mean, there's a lot of things that have been solved, a lot of technical things what have been solved, but there's still, I think, the most difficult ones on the table.
What about the Nordic or the Nordic-Baltic input there in the negotiations, and maybe visibility in general, that how is this region seen by others?
Well, Nordic countries have been very active. The presidency have asked many of the Nordic ministers to do the consultation on behalf of the presidency. There's most of the parts, there's a consultation done by the two ministers, one of the developing countries and one from the developed countries. And actually there's, I think there's a Swedish minister and Danish minister and Norwegian minister who is doing this consultation or being this developed country part. And then inside the EU, I'm one of the negotiation from EU for the adaptation, and then if you look at the EU's chief negotiators, there is Finnish Outi Honkatuki as well. So Nordic countries have been very active, and also this pavilion here, it has been very busy the last week and this week also. So we try to keep our flags very, very high.
Yeah, and I understand that the Nordics and the Baltics were also quite active last week when there was the Finance Day and the meeting of the Coalition of Finance Ministers. Okay, to finance now. How do you see that? What is the role of these international financial institutions in this climate battle?
I think it's very important. It's very important, and if you look at the Nordic, these Nordic finance institutions, I think we have a lot to keep to other countries, because if you look at the Nordic countries, we have a lot of solutions, we have a lot of innovative technology, and it's important that we can scale up them. And in that stage, there is important that we have this kind of financial instrument we can use for that. And I'm very happy that the Nordic business is understood that we can do more, and not only in our own countries, but we can grow our carbon handprint to have these kind of solutions which we can sell abroad and reduce the emissions abroad. And of course we need to make sure that we are doing it in our own countries, but then we can have the solutions to help the others. And there the role of the finance is very important.
So what would be your kind of inspirational message or tagline to our heads of institutions who are here in Helsinki?
Well, I think you should keep good work, and then because if you think about what other the Nordic countries can, what we can deliver to others, we have a great the tradition for the inclusiveness, and we have gender equality questions which are very important for us. The human rights are always there. So when we are financing different kinds of projects, we need to take care that also these aspects are involved.
All right, thank you. I think we can, I know that you have an extremely busy schedule, so I think we could take one question either from here, from Helsinki or from Glasgow, before we let you go. Do we have a question? Is there a question in Glasgow or? Okay, if there are no questions, then I would like to thank you, Minister, for this briefing. It's really highly valued, and good luck with the negotiations.
Thank you.
And now actually we are moving to the panel part, and that means that my colleague Josefine Hoviniemi will take over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and hello everybody. Hello Andre, hello Karin, hello Trond. You are in a good situation because you are actually sitting on much of the financing that actually can do something for the climate action, for environmental, for sustainable development. So maybe you would like to briefly go through what your organization is doing, and maybe some examples on what you have been doing and what concrete impact you can do. So let's start now with Andre. I'll leave the word to you. And I'll just to the audience. After this, we can then take questions from the audience. But let's first give the word to all three of them.
Thank you, Josephine. Welcome everybody joining here in Helsinki, but also in Glasgow. It's great to be here with our two sister organizations. There are many similarities, there are a few differences as well. I represent the Nordic Investment Bank, which basically is owned by the 5 Nordic countries and the 3 Baltic countries. So it's perhaps a little bit broader region in terms of the ownership. The Nordic Investment Bank has a mandate to finance projects that improve productivity and benefit the environment. So these are the 2 pillars on which we are standing, and I think particularly the environmental side is relevant to the COP agenda, and we recognize that this has been a topic and theme that has been growing in importance over the past few years. I was lucky enough to be in Glasgow last week, and it is also great that I had the opportunity to speak at the Nordic Pavilion. I think the Nordic unity in this particular topic, I think, is very important. We are otherwise too small. The problem is global, and I also hope, and jointly owned, but I also hope that the solution is going to be jointly developed. What we do is long-term loans, and perhaps I would just give one example of a relatively new product that has come up more recently in the financial sector, and something where the Nordic Investment Bank is one of the pioneers to come in, which is the KPI, or Key Performance Indicators related loan, where basically not only we do what we normally do, i.e. we assess every single project when it comes to approval for financing, and assess every single corporate that would benefit from our loan, but we would also then look into setting up very specific criteria that the corporate would need to comply with. And that we just signed, by the way, the first KPI-linked loan by us on the 28th of October to a Swedish company, Electrolux Professional, where we have set up, if you could have the next slide, please, where we have set up 3 of those criteria. The first one is reducing the CO2 emissions from operations. The second one is to reduce water use in its operations, and then thirdly to also decrease the cooling gases at the corporate. And I think it is something where you can see us kind of. You said sitting on the money. We're not sitting on the money. We're using the money.
That's good. That's better.
This is a good demonstration of the fact that we have been doing various different things, being out in the green bond market already 10 years ago. We just celebrated the 10th anniversary. We have been issuing also blue bonds for the cleaner Baltic Sea. We invest in both our member countries. We can also invest in the countries beyond our own member region. And from those backgrounds and from those lessons that we have learned, both attracting investors' money in the global capital markets, but then also using it mostly in our region, and where necessary also outside our region, we have developed products which, as I said, environment is very close to our heart, and now the KPI-linked loan, I think, is a good example to bring up as something that is innovative. So all in all, I would call the Nordic Investment Bank as a bank financing the future.
Great, that sounds great. So this green has become very, very big also for you. So you made a pledge at the Finance Day in Glasgow last week. What was that about?
I did voice out an ambition. Pledges are given by people a lot more important than me, heads of countries and so on. But I did voice out an ambition that between 2021 to 2030, we would be financing projects that in aggregate would amount to 30 billion euros, specifically bringing the environmental benefits according to our own mandate criteria, according to our own sustainability and ESG assessment criteria, where we can rate that, yes, there is a specific benefit, and yes, we can rate it good, very good, or excellent according to our own categories. And I think the 10 years will demonstrate whether or not my ambition can become true. It's challenging, but I think it's doable.
Interesting. Who can benefit? Who can actually be receiver of this 30 billion?
Well, it could be corporates. It could be municipalities. We do a lot of mandate-related, specifically environmental mandate-related projects with various municipalities, be it for heating, be it for cleaner water, be it for sewage, etc. So I think it could virtually be anybody. I mean, the beauty of NIB, I think, as I see it, is that we can work both with governments and we can work with the private sector. And I would bring in that kind of NIB potentially being a bridge between the two, and certainly available for both sides, also in the broader context of the climate change mitigation and adoption and the COP, where member countries please use us more, and we also work very hard to find the best possible clients for the best and most impactful investments that we can make.
Great, thank you, Andre. Just to give everybody a word, Karin, you are head of the Nordic Development Fund, which is acting in slightly different markets, or quite a different market. So I will give the floor to you, and you could shortly explain what NDF, that's the abbreviation for the bank, for the fund, what you are doing, and some examples.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And same but different, slightly different. There are many things that are common to us, but we also have a bit of a different focus. So I could speak, but I could also speak, and you could view the slides at the same time if you want to. So next then. The first one, which will then present NDF in a nutshell. So we're the joint Nordic Climate and Development Fund. So we work in the nexus between climate and development. And I think it's quite difficult to see any projects within climate in developing countries that are not also address one more of the 17 SDGs. So we describe ourselves as working in the nexus between climate and development. We focus on both climate mitigation and adaptation, and has a very strong ambition to increase the share of adaptation in our portfolio. We also, when it comes to geography, focus on the least developed countries and countries in fragile situations. Already now we have 50% plus of our portfolio in sub-Saharan Africa, but our ambition is to increase that to approximately 60%. Then we, and to some extent, definitely unlike NIB, and also definitely to some extent unlike Nefco, we can blend our financing with grants, loans, and equity. And our owners, the 5 Nordic countries, they've also asked us to keep high concessionality in the project. So 50% of the financing should be as grants in whatever we do. So this is sort of the focus we have, but then cross-cutting. We also, since we are a Nordic fund, we advance Nordic leadership that goes through everything that we engage in. For us, that means very much in line with what we heard the minister say, to advance Nordic solutions and also to advance Nordic priorities in priorities such as high engagement in fragile states, in gender, among other things. Then when it comes to Nordic solutions, for example, we have different projects where we also then address and present ideas around sustainable cities. Partners is something else that goes cross-cut everything we do. We're an institution which relies very much on forming strategic partnerships. And for us, that means that we do our projects together with other IFIs, other multilateral banks, but also with private sector partners such as fund managers from the private sector. For us, this means that we have a proactive approach to partnerships. We say that we co-create, convene, and complement. So let's have a look at the next slide to illustrate one project which has many of these aspects of NDF. This is a project that we have entered into, and the lead partner in this project is the African Development Bank. It's called the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa. It's an umbrella arrangement, if you wish, that focus on both technical assistance, but also investments in some key strategic areas within sustainable energy in Africa. We have a strong Nordic presence in this fund. Denmark was the first one to put money into the fund, and Sweden, Norway is there, and as well as the US and Germany and other partners. What is in particular interesting with this fund for us is that we can prove that we follow not just the Nordic leadership, but also to other strategic pathways that we have, early stage and catalytic financing. So within the umbrella of the CFA fund, different individual funds, impact investment funds, are developed, or even individual projects. So we have contributed to the development of an impact investment fund called the OGEF, Off-Grid Energy Facility, where NDF was the one to finance the structuring of the fund. We went out together with the African Development Bank and procured the fund manager, and we were the first one to inject the first seed money into the fund. It's up and running and doing a lot of interesting investments. So yes, this, I hope, will serve as NDF in a nutshell.
Great. And our minister, Mikkonen, she mentioned this adaptation as a very important part. So, and you are doing quite a lot of that, but you focus on this in low-income countries. So why is it so important that we Nordics, that we invest in those countries?
I think that, of course, for me at least, and with my perspective from development cooperation, we cannot solve the climate crisis unless we bring every party to the table. And the developing world, they are very important partners, even though also they have not contributed very much to the situation where we are right now, and not enough funding is going now to help these countries to enter into the trajectory of green and sustainable development. So it's not about just development cooperation, it's a joint problem that we're trying to solve. And Nordic countries, they have a very strong voice. I can really sign up on that from what the minister said, also from my previous position as executive director in the African Development Bank, where the Nordic is highly regarded, and you can really influence the narrative and the agenda by joining forces. Instead of speaking for Sweden or Norway or whatnot, you speak for the Nordics, you will have a strong voice. So in essence, I would say this is why the Nordics should engage in climate finance on the global arena.
And you mentioned all of these Nordic strength and Nordic values, very important. And yesterday, I think yesterday was the gender day at COP officially. So we have heard a lot of talk about gender equality. So how is that reflected in your decisions to finance?
To set the context, maybe first, we know that poor countries, they are the ones that are mostly affected by climate change. They have the storms, the flooding, and all these aspects which will then make their lives more difficult and worse. But it's also true that women and men, they are differently affected by climate change. So if you want to have, and we all want to have, a productive and successful design of a project, you have to use the gender lens. And gender is not just a human right, it's an objective as such, but it's also a driver for better projects. So, in essence, to use the gender lens, that's not just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. And we use that.
Great. Thank you, Karin. Now let's go over to Trond and the Nordic Green Bank Nefco. So same thing, if you could give an overview of what Nefco is doing and some nice cases to show what it means in practice.
Sure. Thank you, Sophia. I'm very happy to be here together with my dear colleagues from NIB and NBF. And before starting out saying why we are a separate, the third one, third finance institutions here, of course, what makes us having a joint interest is exactly what Karin touched upon, this Nordic interest and doing sustainable finance. That is a Nordic interest that we all do. And we can maybe come back to exactly what that means later, but I just wanted to start it out by that. If we go to the next slide, let me explain then what Nefco is. So our mandate is to accelerate the green transition. And we only do green products. And that's why we dare to call ourselves the Nordic Green Bank. That's all we do. And we do that by providing risk capital. And we are talking now high risk projects. So we provide high risk capital for scaling up on Nordic green solutions globally. That's really what we do. We focus on doing many projects instead of doing few large projects. So many projects, doing them fast and scaling up and providing risk capital. That is in essence what we do. We like also to say that we are additional to commercial banks. We don't want to compete with commercial banks. We should take more risk to them, but we are very happy if we can contribute to private capital joining us and reducing the risk for them. So that's also an important part. We operate today in three main areas, I would say. One is that we provide this risk capital to Nordic SMEs for scaling up on international markets. The other area we have worked on for a long time is Eastern Europe, where we do both private, but mainly these days municipal funding. And there's a huge need for green projects in Eastern Europe, as we know. And in many ways, a euro spent in Eastern Europe can have bigger environmental effects than it can here in the Nordics. So that's why we do that. And we also, the third area is that we administer a number of funds for the Nordic governments and other institutions for specific tasks. And that can be funding projects for the Arctic Council, all the way to providing result-based financing for off-grid energy providers in Africa. So those are the three areas. Let me take an example then. If you go to the next slide, here we see a small company. Typically, what we finance. This is Solar Water Solutions, a Finnish family enterprise that have invented a modular-based solution that cleans and makes salt water drinkable. And they do that without using any fossil fuels and any batteries. And it works. They have made it, but they are now at the stage where they need financing to scale this up. So to mass produce them, if you like. So we have provided financing for them to make 10 of these to Morocco, where there's a specific need with a lot of drought. And when they have delivered this and get paid, they can reuse the funding even to provide similar solutions to other areas. They are looking at Egypt and also Caribbean area. So this is a typical project that we do. This company struggled to get financing from commercial banks, so we can take that higher risks. And when they have sold the first 10 and then another 20 and 30, I'm sure they will be able to get financing for further growth from private markets. That's just in essence a very good example, I think, of what we do.
You mentioned this higher risk. What does it mean in practice with this risk capital and higher risk than the commercial bank?
Yeah, in practice, it means that we can give loans that are unsecured, for example, with no security at all, or are subordinated to other loans that they might have. So that's what it means, higher risk. And we are filling a gap that exists in the market. We know there's a need for this kind of high risk loans, and it's difficult to find it. There are few providers of such financing. It can also be equity. It can be what we call mezzanine financing, convertible loans, anything between the first equity rounds that the company have or the founders have put in, and the more senior bank loans that will come later. That area in between is where we operate, and that is where we take the higher risk.
Okay, great. And I have understood there's a really urgent need to ramp up both public and private finance in order to help halve emissions and reach the 1.5 degrees goal. And you were all talking about private capital and public capital and blending and having private capital and joining. But what is your recipe to mobilize both public and private financing in this green transition? If I may start with Trond and then.
Yeah, I'm sure there can be several recipes, but one that we would focus on is that, you know, we need, of course, really need private capital on a massive scale to help to solve the climate crisis. There is no way around that. But we also know that private capital is conservative. They don't like to take too much risk and start new things. So, and here's where we can come in using our public money to do things differently, to test out new models and new ways of financing. We can, as we talked about, take more risk. We can fill a gap, but we also need to demonstrate that this model is profitable. And by doing that, we hope, and we are quite certain that we will engage more private capital to do the same. So in a way, a fairly ambitious goal, but could be that we would like to really transform finance to become more green. I mean, eventually all finance should be green finance, I would say.
And NIB is going a good way. You are already made this ambition, not pledge. And what is you are dealing with much larger projects. How can you mobilize public and private?
I would first say that you don't necessarily need to get both sides involved in every single project, but you can do certain projects with the private sector, you can do certain projects with the public sector. That's number one. Number two, it is NIB's principle that we only finance up to 50% of the project. So by definition, we are co-financing and providing an additional value added to the investment by the owners and perhaps loans by other banks, be them commercial banks or be them similar international financial institutions. So I would say that the concept really is in being the catalyzer sometimes, and also maybe to your earlier question as to what is the higher risk. The higher risk can also be longer tenor, of course. And when the private banks, even in the developed worlds these days, they mostly like to go 5 years revolving credit facilities. Then we can actually go 25 years. We can go 30 years, depending on the project, and kind of set that base, making sure that the project is fully funded from the start.
Great. Karin, what do you say about mobilizing?
I say more or less the same thing, and also recognizing that in the development finance sector, we talk about going from billions to trillions, and we will not go from billions to trillions without crowding in the private sector for the needs that the developing countries have. So I will give you an example. In Glasgow, on Monday, we were very happy to be part of a launch of quite a big private equity fund that aims to manage approximately 500 million euro. This fund is co-managed between the EIB and Allianz, which is, you know, straightforward, the player on the financial markets, and NDF together with KfW. I'm sorry about all these acronyms. They are the development finance institution of Germany. We put in the early stage junior equity into this fund. And by doing so, already now, in the first launch, the first close of the fund, a Nordic pension fund has injected 150 million euro. I think this is a fantastic example for crowding in, risk mitigation, but also the structure of the fund. If you want to crowd in, and I don't know if my colleagues agree, but if you want to crowd in pension funds, they will not come in with 5 million euro, 10 million euro. They need bigger amounts. So this way we can bundle financing, and the structure is a fund of fund investing them in turn in individual funds in emerging markets, and with a strong focus on the least developed countries, which is absolutely not possible without this risk mitigation and the structure where you bundle the investments. So that's the way we walk the talk.
Great. And of course, apart from the climate, biodiversity issues is really now on top of the agenda as well. We know it is a real threat. So how can we make sure also biodiversity issues are taken into account in the financing that you are providing, or the actions that you are financing? Maybe who want to?
Well, again, we are maybe a little bit on the bigger scale, but of course we do take the various ways of the linkage between, you know, biodiversity and the climate change into account. You know, forestation is a very important topic in that. I think it was certainly last week, it was one of what I would call a bigger achievements in Glasgow, that, you know, basically to stop the deforestation of the planet by 2030, and more than 100 countries joining, is a very significant and concrete step. The forest soaks up about 20% of the global CO2 emissions over the past 20 years or so, you know, a total of 7.6 million tons. And that is something where, you know, we could also kind of link the two items. We can't tick all the boxes on every project. You know, that I think we need to remain realistic, that all the good things we want to do, they might not necessarily happen within the same project.
Yeah, if I can add from a different angle, I think, you know, sustainable finance cannot only be climate finance. It has to be look at biodiversity as well. So a couple of ways we can contribute to that. We can actively look for what we call nature-based solutions, or projects that are nature-based. Easier said than done, but that is something that is in our strategy, that we actively look for those projects, and such projects would score very high on the green impact scale, and therefore we would be willing to take even more financial risk. So we can gear our risk appetite to biodiversity, if you like. Another element is that when we look at projects, it's very important that we do not harm biodiversity. So when we look at projects, we use this EU taxonomy, which was the topic of the previous session, so I won't go much into that. But if you finance a climate project, for example, let's say a wind power plant, the taxonomy says that that project should not do any significant harm to any of the other 5 categories. So if we do a good climate project, but it harms the nature, then it cannot actually be called green financing. So we have to look into this from both sides, both looking for nature-based solutions, but also making sure we don't harm biodiversity in any of the other type of projects we do.
Right. Karin, what do you say?
I pick up on what Trond said, and then on the do no harm, but there is also the ambition to go beyond do no harm. And for example, if you look at adaptation projects, such as we have a project in Rwanda on restoration of wetlands, that's very close to biodiversity. So there is a link between climate, and in particular adaptation and biodiversity. And of course, you have to take a holistic approach to what you do, and you can describe it as you pay attention to all the 17 SDGs in what you do. So that's one part of it, which is more the compliance part of it, the do no harm. But if you want to go beyond do no harm, there is also a increased awareness among companies that not paying attention to loss of biodiversity will cost a lot of money. So risk mitigation, the flip side of the opportunity in the coin, opportunity risk, is to pay attention to do no harm and see that if you pay attention to this, this will also go beyond do no harm. This will save money for you if you pay attention to this.
Maybe I would just add,
yes, please.
it is relevant on a variety of projects, big infrastructure projects, be it the road, railway, bridges, etc. And in many countries, of course, you have local rules and regulations about these things. I also happen to be at the board of the Rail Baltica, which is the new fast-speed railway linking the 3 Baltic countries to the west of Europe. And we see that in the design and planning process, these environmental studies are actually crucially important to go through, because if you don't, you break the rules, plus you will have people that come after you, and the reputation of the project as well as the company will be damaged.
Yeah.
And it will cost you money in maintenance if you don't do it right from the beginning.
Yes.
So it's also a financial aspect of doing it right.
Yeah, good. Is there any question from the public, from the audience? Yes.
If you would start from scratch and you have 3 Nordic organizations.
Questions from here, I will use this one, if she remembers it.
Thank you. My name is Mikko Halonen. If you would start from scratch and you want to solve these problems, would you want to have a 4th Nordic organization next to you? Or do you think you 3 working together can address the problems that you are raising here today?
We are of course different in terms of what we focus. The mandates differ, the size of projects differ, the regional focus differs. But I think we share a lot of similar values, and I think this is the beauty about us, that we share the same ownership base. Within that ownership base, there are similarities in terms of values, both cultural, but also values relating to the environment. And I think the Nordics have been, for a long time, the forerunners of kind of raising these issues. And it's not a coincidence that we have these 3 institutions here. Whether we would need a 4th or 5th, I don't know. That's for the shareholders to decide.
But my opinion is that no, and I think that that is very often the solution. If you think that there is a gap, create a new institution. I think that we have all the prerequisites to address the necessary questions, and I also think that we could do more. And for example, I think that we are already having a dialogue among ourselves, but also on this area of the Nordic voice, to some extent also acting as I would not advocacy, because that is too much to say, but to find ways of providing the Nordic voice on the global arena. I think here is something that we could work together and do more of, while it may be difficult, as you can see from our different mandates, to co-finance in individual projects, because we do have different business models. So that's my view.
although I might add, we do from time to time co-finance and work together on the same projects, and we have done that as well. So, so I agree. I don't think we need the fourth institution, but what we do need and what we are doing is to talk to each other a lot, and also constantly adapt our strategies and talk to our owners, and that there is this coordination on, because we have the same owners, almost at least, the addition of the Baltic states for NIB, that they talk to each other, and also we in dialogue with them find out, you know, who should do what. So
maybe sometimes we can be the bridge, even
exactly.
within that small ownership group.
Exactly.
You know, like at the NIB, we had just more recently, for a few months, discussion about our updated sustainability policy. And of course, we can hear each and every individual shareholder, but we would have to come to a certain consensus, which probably means that each of those individual shareholders would need to compromise a little bit to come to the solution that everybody thinks is this will work.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that makes really a difference, because you work in you work with larger projects, with you work in lower income countries, you work with smaller, medium-sized projects. So you have also very different type of client base. They might have a slightly different scope. You probably have different financial instruments as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So that would work. So it's better to have strongly then linked to those than do a compromise that would not benefit.
Exactly.
Yeah, good. Any more questions from the audience? I don't see any. Great. You, as mentioned, as you are so different, you have these different mandates, you have different competencies, but also Minister Mikkonen mentioned we have so many innovative solutions in the Nordics. So how can we enable the implementation of these through your respective solutions? She mentioned that the Nordics have solution technology, innovation that should be scaled up. So could you shortly go through how you would, what is your institution's way of doing it? Maybe Karin.
No, what we do is that we bring these solutions to the market, while the market is not just always the private sector market, but also the public sector market. And our way of doing is working together with our partners to, as I said, bring these solutions to the market. And for example, and since we are in Helsinki, I can highlight a project that we have together with the Finnish government and with Sitra and the African Development Bank. This is a trust fund on circular economy, which is, well, it's not just a Finnish project, or it's not just a Finnish solution, but very much a Nordic solution. And here we work together with the African Development Bank and a number of African countries to create awareness about what can circular economy mean for these countries, and also to take that a step further, also work as an incubator for individual companies to be able to develop business ideas and in the end also get financing. So this is very much, I think, bringing to the table Nordic solutions and act upon it.
And yeah, I think here's a good example how we can complement each other, whereas you can do this, studies and areas and so on. We can finance them directly companies in the same area. So we attack the issues, the innovations from different angles. So that is a good example why it's good to have 2 or 3 different institutions doing things differently, in fact, but towards the same goals to promote innovations, green innovations.
I perhaps believe that we all see also ourselves as enablers. We don't think that we necessarily need to create, these fantastic ideas. I am a strong believer that the private sector will do a lot of that, perhaps sometimes in cooperation with science potential and universities and so on. We finance a lot of the projects that are exactly on the verge, or where the science meets the entrepreneurship, and many of these projects. And I also see a very close link between our productivity mandate and our environmental mandate, because the environmental shift and the transition is going to have a very significant price tag to it. And you can only afford it if you are competitive. I.e., if you do, you're sustainable not only in the environmental sense, but you're also sustainable in terms of your economics and financials. And one of the links, for instance, for us from more recent times is a company established in Sweden, Northvolt, which is going to produce batteries. I think it is crucially important that we would have something in our own region that is able to kind of scale up to the extent that it can set itself up against the global competition, be it from China or America. And whilst we perhaps go in there with a relatively small portion of the total financing package, we are the enabler very often. And being there is often a quality mark. Especially so NIB being also AAA rated institution credit-wise.
Yeah, I agree very much. We are really here to enable innovations to grow and grow fast. I mean, from Nefco point of view, we want to find small companies that actually have the potential to grow on a global scale, to become eventually global companies. And we know that this is possible today. You can grow very fast with the right product and with the right solution. So we want to, exactly like Andre says, we want to be enablers. Doesn't mean that we can also be innovative in our own products and like the KPI-based loan that Andre mentioned. And we have recently developed a small green recovery facility, which we did very quickly during the pandemic for companies to kickstart projects that they put on hold with a simplified, standardized solution. And that has proven extremely popular. So we can also be innovative with our own products, of course.
And enabling is a very good word. And then maybe adding to that word, enabling environment, which for us means that we pave the way. So we come a bit early on, as you said, in you as well, in this project cycle, where working with African Development Bank and individual countries to pave the way for circular economy, private sector solutions. That is our role.
And as you, Andre, mentioned, it's really also helping to make this Nordic region more competitive. Something that we know is in the vision.
We should not forget that we are relatively small individually.
Exactly. So Nordic cooperation is important in that sense.
But together we are not insignificant, I would say.
That's the Norwegian.
So this is the second last day of the Nordic Pavilion and Nordic Hub events. And I think it has become pretty clear that we all really wish to secure a more livable planet. And yesterday I was here listening to the younger generation. So very understandably, very much concerned about what's happening in the world today and at this COP. And one of their dreams, they have dreams there, you can see on the wall. One of their dreams is to see banks invest sustainably and stop bankrolling extinction. So they really want to see the banks taking part in this. And as you are all financial institutions, and Andre, you mentioned you're not sitting on the money, but really using them for concrete actions, which is really great. Could you give a last note to the audience here and they're all online as a response to this dream of the younger people? What is sustainable financing? How can you make sure that the financing your institutions are working on is really sustainable and go to the right actions? What is sustainable finance? Who want to?
For us, of course, I mean, sustainable finance, that is our raison d'etre. That's the purpose. That's why we exist. And of course, I mean, you could also define, and I think a commonly used definition of sustainable finance is finance beyond the financial return. That's one way of expressing it, and that's definitely true for us. But paying attention not just to the financial return, but the environmental return, the social return, and also governance as a compliance, that's sustainable finance. And for NDF, that's really, that is what is guiding us in every single transaction. And it is different for commercial banks, of course, because they have to be financially viable, and that is not in our mandate. So,
well, it is in our mandate. We actually need to sustain our capital and grow it. So I strongly believe, and I want to mention that sustainable finance is also profitable finance. It's profitable for the globe. It's profitable for the investors. It's profitable for all of us. And when we say sustainable finance, we mean really finance. and our dream, as I mentioned, is that all finance should be sustainable finance. It means finance should be climate neutral, it should be climate resilient, it should be resource efficient, and it should be fair. So those are really the principle that all finance should be governed by. And of course, how we do it is this, but it's becoming mainstream now, is this ESG framework. You know, you evaluate environmental standards, the EU taxonomy, social standards, human rights, gender we talked about, and so on, and governance, not least. You know, executive pay, how is the management structure of companies, how is their tax status, are they paying their taxes, and going beyond legal, but actually doing what you know is morally right to do. So I would say that is sustainable finance, and as I said, we need all finance to be sustainable.
Andre.
I saw two questions, in fact, in what you brought up, the young generation argument and then sustainable finance. I will not start adding my thoughts to what the colleagues here have said, how to define it, but I would maybe become a little bit philosophical and say that the AAA, which I earlier used for a credit rating, could also be used for sustainable financing, i.e. there should be financing opportunities that are first available, i.e. products that exist. Secondly, accessible, and that's the fairness element to all. And then finally, affordable, i.e. not too expensive, because the economics in the end, they would need to work. You know, it's great to do great things, but if you keep losing money, then you stop pretty soon when the money runs out. Coming to the young generation, I think this is something that gives me hope. And I saw that in Glasgow. I saw that also for my own children. I think the fact that the young generation is thinking greener than perhaps we did at the same age, certainly, I think is giving me a lot of hope. And the other bit that gives me hope is the very strong private sector engagement. Something that I see, you know, not only in conferences like the COP26, but I also see it when we go out and meet our customers. You know, companies big and small, they do think about, you know, how do they actually make a difference, all the way from energy efficiency, using less, but also then, you know, moving to green energy sources and reducing pollution from their own operations and from the suppliers that they have.
Right. So I hope the younger generation, we have a few here. Are you satisfied with the answer? No, a lot of things to do, but here we hear that we have also concrete action going on, having financing that is already accessible, also affordable. And with those words from you, I think we can close this event, unless anybody else has any question. Thank you very much to both the audience in Helsinki and online, and to Andre, Karin, and Trond for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.